Greetings to one and all. Good morning, good afternoon, or whatever time of the day it may be for you. I invite us all to join together as we go before God in prayer. Let us pray. God of all, we gather before you on this day, remembering the peoples and nations on the African continent as we celebrate and observe Africa Day. We give thanks for those who have led your people throughout all generations, bringing about the development in all areas of life. We acknowledge that your hand has guided the nations and peoples on this continent as they sought to determine your purpose and divine destiny for them as a people. For all who faithfully served your people rather than serving themselves, we give thanks. Grant to your people the firm resolve to stand faithful and loyal to your words and promises. As we observe and celebrate Africa Day, we implore you, O God, to unite all people on this continent, those who come from different races and languages, to be a united Africa, free from prejudice and hatred. Make of them to be a people where, as they continue to maintain the respect for others and themselves, they will also further build nations that are grounded on the strong foundation of national reconciliation. We pray that the pursuit of peace and reconciliation will be visible reminders to all that as your people we share your character, and by so doing, help us to remain useful tools of peace in your ministry of reconciliation. O God, as you were seen in Christ reconciling the world with yourself, so help us as your people in Africa to emulate this golden ministry of reconciliation. Renew in us a spirit of love, to love as to be loved, and to reconcile as to be reconciled. God of liberation and justice, defender of the poor and marginalized, we seek your guidance in this hour for the nations and peoples on the African continent. Give to your people vision and confidence to become prophets when resources are looted. Open ears to hear the cries of the widows. Stir among your people bowels of compassion so that orphans will be fed and cared for. Grant courage, we pray, to denounce injustice by the powerful. May fearlessness be given to your people so that they may open their mouths, demanding drugs for the sick and care for all who are abandoned. May voices be heard as they denounce wastefulness of the affluent. Empower us as your people to tackle corrupt systems. And as we gather today praying for the continent of Africa, we ask for your forgiveness for our silence. Silence, particularly in the face of gender-based violence. Forgive our complicity with systems and people who rob people of life rather than enable them to live their purpose-driven lives. In your mercy, forgive our condemnation, especially of people living with HIV. Forgive us when we deal lightly with the wounds of your people. Forgive the times when we have offered artificial solutions. And as we receive your forgiveness, move us to repentance so that we will be moved to be your instruments of love, peace, and reconciliation. Be among us even as we engage in this webinar today, that as voices are heard, so too and through these voices, we will hear your voice speaking to us. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Brother Mikey, for the opening prayer. We thank you for being there with us today. Friends, I welcome you this afternoon to this webinar that we are holding on 24 May to commemorate Africa Day, which is properly tomorrow and not today. But as you might be aware, we decided to do this webinar today because there are in some countries on the African continent that are commemorating Africa Day as a public holiday, and we did not want to have friends and colleagues that will be on a holiday tomorrow to then be working on their public holiday. And so we decided that we come together this afternoon, a day before Africa Day properly, to think about this day. And what we have done as World Council of Churches is to put together a team of individuals of some standing from the different regions of the African continent to share and reflect on this particular day. And I'm so excited that we have a cross-section of people, women, men, medium-aged, that are committed to the cause of Africa and that are interested in sharing with us what this day means and how we can reflect as faith communities, as Christians, as Muslims, how we want to see Africa moving forward. And as World Council of Churches, we are interested in hearing from people on the continent on what this day means. So today in our event, allow me to welcome our moderator for today, Reverend Professor Eric Niboti Anum from Ghana. I have known Professor Eric for some time now, and I have learned a lot from him. I am also hoping that we will learn a lot from Professor Eric and the team of panelists as we reflect on this day today. It is really an honor that we have him with us and that we have this opportunity to learn from him and to listen. And I see that we have people from all over the world that have joined us. I've seen people from Nigeria, greetings from Brazil. We have somebody from Burundi, Nigeria, Namibia, Soma in the UK, Zimbabwe, we have Thailand, we have as well. So we really have a lot of people logging in from all over the world because there are a lot of people that wish for the best for Africa. This is an opportunity that we have today to reflect on this. Professor Eric, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Gunda. It's really a pleasure for me to really be the moderator for this session. The topic that has been chosen is pluralism, racism, and xenophobia, the colonial missionary legacy and conflict in post-colonial Africa. And we have an able group of panelists to help us. I'll first start by introducing them, and then I would give just an opening statement for us to go on. The first is the Reverend Charles Berahino. Berahino is the Executive Secretary for Peace and Diaconia at the All African Conference of Churches based in Nairobi. The next is Reverend Dr. Frank Chikani, I'm told, is here to join us. Frank Chikani is the moderator of the WCC Commission of the Churches on International Affairs. He is also an emeritus pastor of the Apostolic Faith Mission of South Africa. The next is Dr. Azizat O. Amoloye Adebayo. He holds an LLB, which is a law degree in common and Islamic law from Usmanu Danfodio University, Sokoto, and an LLM degree from the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. The next, which is the last panelist, is Reverend Dr. Felicidade Naomi Chirinda. He is the president of the Mozambique Council of Churches and a minister of the Presbyterian Church of Mozambique. Panelists, you are welcome, and all the members, you are welcome to this very important day that we together try to reflect and to see how we can be of help. You are all welcome. But what is all this about? Before the panelists come in, what is all these African Day or OAU Day and AU Day about? The African Union Day, which is the 25th of May, looks back to the formation of the Organization of African Unity, and this started in 1963. It has been observed in all sorts of ways, including a whole month celebration to a week celebration. Some African countries observed that day as a public holiday. Both Africans on the continent and in diaspora are still figuring out the best way to celebrate it. This year, the AU has declared that the year, that is 2022, should be a year of nutrition. And they have looked at it, and what they aim at doing is strengthening resilience in nutrition and food security on the African continent. And the subtitle is Strengthening Agro-Food Systems, Health and Social Protection Systems for the Acceleration of Human, Social, and Economic Capital Development. However, our colonial past left its residues of Western dominant structures in the democratizing process. And that has made us now start looking at food security when we are faced with poverty at various angles. What we see is the replacement of white faces with black faces, which has not been able to take us to the promised land of fruition, progress. We are therefore not able to celebrate our freedom from our colonial past in the present, and the future itself looks bleak. The fragmentation that was caused by the partitioning of our countries into Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone, and whatever phone you call it, is still with us. You meet a French colony, person from a French colony who feels is more French than African. You meet an Anglophone person from a British colony who feels more Commonwealth than being a person of the African Union. We are therefore not able to actually reap the fruits of our independence in our post-independent period. The fragmentation that was caused by the partition of our countries has really been a problem. It has led to compartmentalization, which makes us feel that we don't need each other to develop our nations. There is very little evidence to show that the AU Day is a massive celebration of our Africanness as a people. Europe is opening its doors to other Europeans to enter, but African nations are still struggling with border disputes, and it is even very cumbersome to travel from one African country to the other, be it Eastern, Central, Western, or Northern. There's so much ethnocentrism and strife, which has fueled most of the wars in the regions in Africa. Take Sudan, Somali, DR Congo, Ethiopia. We now even have coup d'etats rearing its ugly head again in Mali, Guinea, and the next countries are also looking forward to it. Indeed, in other areas, the absence of extreme violence of full-blown war is not the presence of peace. Take a look at Mozambique, Uganda, Nigeria, where the Biafra people are still engaged in fighting for an independent state, are now recruiting people through social media. A Zimbabwean feels excluded by South Africans, even though they are all part of the Southern African community. The African in diaspora who visits Africa is looked upon as a stranger and not a sister or brother. Indeed, the church is not an innocent party of all these. The church sometimes have participated actively in perpetuating the racism and xenophobia in the pluralistic context that we live in. A lot of the atrocities are approved by church bodies, and prayers are said to support such anomalies, sometimes due to religious affiliation and political correctness. We have to agree that we in Africa are in a mess and need to wake up from our slumber. We have to agree that there is the need for social cohesion, and we are the ones who have to solve our problems. Due to the way the churches in Africa are constructed and people are conscripted into it, we need the ecumenical factor to assist in dealing with these challenges. I therefore submit that WCC has the social capital to be able to assist in addressing the legacy of racism, the entrenchment of ethnocentrism, racism, and the impunity of the political operators that we have in our countries. The issue of food security, peace, tranquility, economic growth, and unity are things that we should be looking at as ecumenical bodies. Ladies and gentlemen, panelists, my expectation is that this meeting will come out with actionable recommendations that will address the wounds that we have as Africans, both on the mainland and diaspora, as we celebrate this day. So I look forward with expectation that we are going to have a meeting that will help us to make strides. And this is our call as an ecumenical body. Thank you very much. So we now have to move on. What are the different forms of conflict being experienced in different African countries? And we invite our first panelist, Reverend Charles Berihino, to address us on that.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Eric. Good afternoon to all the participants. I'm glad to join this webinar from the All Africa Conference of Churches, and I'll bring you greetings from the General Secretariat of the All Africa Conference of Churches. We are glad to celebrate the Africa Day, and as Prof. Eric said it, the Africa Day is actually celebrated to remind ourselves of the reason of the creation itself, of the organization of the African Union, that time, which was actually looking to bring about change, bring about freedom, bring about independence that time. But it is sad that years after this independence, we are seeing what we are seeing today in Africa. So let me try to quickly respond to this question. What are the different forms of conflicts that are being experienced in different African countries? Friends, when we look around Africa, some of the conflicts that we see are around tribes, inter-ethnic conflicts. And these opposing tribal or ethnic groups are mainly found within national boundaries, although the inherent problems of artificial borders caused by colonizations have resulted in some ethnic groups being found in 2, 3, or even more countries in Africa. So these interethnic conflicts occur over any number of issues ranging from politics to socio-economic issues. We see ethnic conflicts around religion, around culture, but mainly also around land, as we see it, but also around other natural resources. So interethnic or intertribal conflicts abound in many countries of Africa. So in this post-colonial Africa, these conflicts are greatly exacerbated by the neo-colonial arrangements that characterize many African governments, unfortunately. And in many African countries, where we see that leadership remains in the same hands and continues to serve colonial interests, so the state apparatus are known to sponsor some of the inter-ethnic conflicts that we see around. So there is a need of looking at these as we look at it seriously today. So the first form of conflicts that we see still prevailing in the African continent is related to ethnicity, is related to tribalism. The second type of conflicts that we see around Africa are civil rights conflicts. And the civil rights conflicts arise mainly over issues of participation, over issues of distribution, and over issues of legitimacy in the politics and the governance of nations. So these are real issues that we see around in Africa. So in civil rights conflicts, a section of the country may wage a conflict because the people or a group of people consider the social framework as structured to exclude them, or they feel they are marginalized. And therefore, they seek to correct that kind of situation. Friends, we can talk about so many examples in Africa, either in the past or even today. So these civil rights conflicts, which look at, fighting against discrimination, are clear, are real in many African countries if we look around. Because my time is limited, let me get to probably the last one I'm talking about today, conflicts related to political transitions, mainly within states. Political transition conflicts arose in many African countries out of rising tensions resulting from a stalemated transition to the democratization of political life. And since the movement of democracy starting in the 1990s, we see these tensions arising. This phenomenon is clear, and most of the time is related to elections, or when we see that a number of political leaders don't want to get out of governments, don't want to give out, and they continue to keep power, even if democratically they were not there. So this issue of democratic transition, political transition, is a serious issue that we need to look at today as we talk about this day as we celebrate the day as Africans. We have seen a number of issues resulting from elections. We can cite a lot of cases that we've seen in the previous years. We have seen issues in Zimbabwe. We have seen issues in Kenya. We have seen issues in Cote d'Ivoire. We have seen issues in the DRC. Although we have some good examples like Zimbabwe, like Zambia, like Ghana, but we see that there are a number of countries which are still struggling when it comes to political transition. Friends, I think this is an issue that we need to look at seriously as we are talking about peace, as we are talking about the contribution of churches in the peace building so that we can maintain peace in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very, 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 very much, our brother, for the very insightful thing you're giving us. I think you centered on the main thing from where it started from, and we are very happy about that. So now we move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Ameluyu Adebayo. Please, can you address us?
Thank you very much. And I would also join the first speaker to start on a note of appreciation of WCC for the candidness and probity. Their candidness and probity in organizing this webinar. And that would be appreciated by a consideration of the talking points. And I think the time is ripe on the African continent to be very, very open and being open-minded, regardless of our religious affiliation. So I'll say thank you for having me here, and thank you for developing these talking points. Now, with that said, well, I thank the first speaker for that very seemingly comprehensive discussion of the type of conflict, and I can only add to it. I will try not to parrot everything that has been said. And I think for my part, I would say that at least if I will speak in the context of Nigeria as the most populous African country, the conflict that, well, yes, there is armed conflict, also civil rights conflict, but there is religious conflict. And, you know, at times when we look at indices of development, economic development, political development, the role of religion may not immediately seem apparent because it is consigned to understanding of worship, and it be personal to the order of a particular faith. But in the context of Nigeria, if one would consider the extent of loss of human resources, destruction of capital investments, and they are connected to conflicts that are tied to religion. So the connection that can then be seen. Again, for the Nigerian context, religious conflict can then also be traced to the colonial and missionary legacy. I say colonial in the sense that there are laws that have religious coloration amidst the diversity of Nigeria. And I would say that most African countries would also have this diversity. In Nigeria, on record, there appears to be about 500 ethnolingual affiliations. And there are also 3 main religions out of other forms of religion. But in terms of the law, you see a bias for certain forms of religion, and there is no engagement, there's no public explanation as to why this bias would continue. And these are colonial legacies. So how does it bring about conflict? The holders of religious adherents that enjoy this bias, okay, would always have to be defensive or be held accountable, because is it in realization of their religious rights? Then justifiably, non-adherents will feel disconnected to anything that is rooted in that religious faith. And there is no public engagement to enable citizens to make connection. So you have these forms of conflict or a form of conflict in the sense that if there's a bias for a particular religion, chances are that religious adherents may then feel a kind of superiority above others, and it sort of disconnects others and leaves them in continual competition. So whatever is devised as a form of engagement would always be colored at the base with this sense of inferiority, this sense of competition, this sense of discrimination, and oftentimes it results in violence. Again, and I'm sure that as we go on, we'll have to return to that, economic conflicts. And I use the word advisedly, okay? Majority of people on the African continent are poor, okay? But there's nothing wrong with being poor because it's meant to be a condition. And as we say, no condition is expected to be permanent, isn't it? But there's a question of poverty. And poverty can be the quality of being poor in the terms of material sense. It can also be a poverty of imagination, and it has economic implication. Now, again, to use Nigeria as an example, aside from forms of armed conflicts arising from, the desire to be politically seen and being relevant in terms of the various regions, there are also forms of vocation that are gaining ground now, kidnapping people for ransom as a form of occupation, or over-concentration on political offices because of the proceeds that will be gotten through corrupt means. And oftentimes I find it very, very, it's disheartening that people would resort to such things that it's because of poverty, that you would then turn people to chattels to be ransomed or impoverish a nation. And the excuse is that there are no other choices. So I would again say poverty of imagination results in economic conflict because there is over concentration on resources in resource-rich nations. Nigeria is illustrative of that. And the citizens then come away with a sense of not really actively, engaging their mental faculties appropriately for development. But the essence is then a perspective of sort of trying to gain economic resources through means that lack imagination, because we don't want to use their reflective senses. And I think because I think for time, I will stop here. But again, to also say that tribal conflicts, as the first speaker said, ethno-lingual conflicts, and all these kind of conflicts, we can say that they have roots. It is not to weaponize history at this time. It is not to play victim, but again, in terms of being open and considering where we're coming from, yes, all these have roots in the colonial legacy that most African countries have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amoloyo Adebayo. We are very, very happy to hear you speak to us, especially your emphasis on religious conflict. We thank you so much. We move on to Dr. Naomi Chiranda to address the first question.
Thank you very much, Prof, for this opportunity, and to WCC, because it's really an opportunity to speak out and to share our problems in Mozambique. My first issue will be the terrorism that we are facing now in Cabo Delgado. But we can say that it's not only in Cabo Delgado, because at my last many countries, people are not sleeping well because of people who come during the night and kill the members of the family and take all their belongings. So we think that these people are spreading in all our provinces. The terrorism in Cabo Delgado, it was, I don't know how to classify, to say, because it's terrible to see what people experienced and are still experiencing when a religion, even if we reject that is a religion, no, but people use religion to terrorize other people, killing them, and is dividing their members in the presence of their spouses, children. So we have too many people traumatized because they observed all these killings that are really unspeakable. So this is the major problem that we have. Cabo Delgado has no schools, were all destroyed, hospitals were destroyed, all economic settings destroyed, people are dispersed, they fled to where they could go, where they have someone who know, but the majority remained in the camps there, where food is scarce. There is nothing I can say like this. So terrorism is the issue that is keeping us very septic now. We don't know how we will end this big problem. The second issue that I can mention here is gender-based violence. We did not know that it's possible that is possible old man to violate children of 5 years, 10 years, but nowadays this is a daily practice. And we don't know why people are behaving like this. It can be maybe because of drugs, abuse of drugs, abuse of alcohol, but African are people who always use the cannabis to produce food, to have force to be strong in their job, but they were not doing these things such as are doing now. And people who we think that are those who can defend us are also doing the same issues. So we have many girls that are now abused, and we don't know what to do with them. They are traumatized. We have many women who, some are killed by their partners, others are badly injured. So these are problems that are affecting our country, and we don't know how to solve these problems. And but we try to do something, but it's not enough. The third issues that I can elect is also HIV. HIV continues to be a problem. And now we are trying with our partners to attract men so that they come to the hospitals or to the meetings to understand that it's important that they are also going into the health institution in order to find drugs that can diminish that the presence of HIV in their blood, so that they can continue working and feeding their families. But another issue that is threatening us is that the churches are not united. And this, as Protestant churches, we think is the result of the division made by our missionaries, divided us into denominations. So now denominations are fighting, are competing, and this is not the way we can do our job united, because it's not so easy. So we are not happy with our way of behaving in the country. We see that moral values disappeared, and the country needs us to reconstruct the life, but we can't because we are not united. And the last thing, but not, it's not because there are not more, but I want to stop there. Education. We have a very poor education. And as Portuguese speaking people, this punish us too much. We have difficulties in expressing ourselves with our brothers. We have all the course people speak English, but we speak Portuguese. So our relationship is not so good. And when you are not able to speak another language, you are classified since the beginning. So I think that in order to overcome all these problems, first of all, we have to find ways to sit down and to, as we are seated today, but with our leaders to identify from where we can begin to work together in order to change the situation that is prevalent now in our countries. I can stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our sister, for addressing us from a Mozambique point of view. And you've listed a whole lot of things. And we pray that the speakers will be very snappy and round up nicely so that we can get the point. Our next speaker is Israel Chitando. We had actually put Israel Chitando in place of Frank Chikani. And so I'll just introduce him briefly. Professor Israel Chitando is Prof of Religions from the University of Zimbabwe. And he's a theologian also and a consultant for the WCC. So Prof. Chitando, you are welcome to address us on isolating the issues.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I am Ezra Chitando with the World Council of Churches in Southern Africa. My colleagues have already covered a lot of the issues, but allow me to raise two critical points at this juncture. Number one, to acknowledge that the 25th of May Africa Day is a highly significant moment in the collective memory of the people of Africa. It is a day when we remember vividly how we, the formerly colonized, have fought gallantly to be recognized as an integral part of the human family. It's been a struggle for Africans to be acknowledged as full human beings. And so, friends, even as we narrate stories of marginality, stories of pain, stories of conflict, let us always remember that Africa has fought hard to be where we are at. So I would like to make that comment. My second comment relates to the conflict that my colleagues have hinted on but not touched on. They've covered other issues. I would like to draw attention to the generational conflict in Africa. My colleagues have spoken about gender, religion, economics, ethnicity, but I would draw attention to the generational conflicts in African politics and society. Let it be said loud and clear that any one of us who is over 35 years of age is already a minority on this continent. Africa is a place dominated by young people. And until such time when we, the elders, now even in my early 50s, I'm already an elder on this African continent, we need to acknowledge that this continent is a continent of young people. So our generation has the responsibility and mandate to make this generation which is coming after us and which is already dominating us, the technologically savvy generation, to be the one that is driving the African agenda. So we can yearn for the Africa we want. We can plan for the Africa we want, but that Africa we want must be driven by young people. And so I submit to us, friends on this call, that we, the African generation, needs to acknowledge the fundamental right and dignity of young people on this continent to run the agenda of this continent. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much for these comments. I think we would then move on. You have added another, which is the issue of the generational conflicts. And so we would move on to the second round of questions which we have in this segment. We have decided to take questions 2 and 3 together. I think so that it will save us time. Questions 2 and 3 are actually together. And so you see where they talk about the round of questions, is in what ways is colonial and missionary fragmentation of communities feeding or fueling current conflicts in Africa? In what ways is colonial and missionary fragmentation of communities feeding or fueling current conflicts in Africa? And then the third one is, how has racism outlived colonialism and missionary activities on the continent? How has racism outlived colonization and missionary activities on the continent? So these are the 2 and 3 we are actually looking out together. And this time round, we would want to start from our sister Naomi Chiranda. Naomi Chiranda, can you address us first on this?
Can you brief repeat the second question?
Is in what ways is colonial and missionary fragmentation of communities feeding or fueling current conflicts in Africa?
Okay. I can say that first of all, the evangelization that we received from our colonial was in two aspects. We had the Catholic Church who worked in Mozambique, not as not bringing true Christianity, but they were instruments to facilitate the dominion of the natives. Blacks were seen as unskillful, and this belief is still there. And they used the ways of confession to imprison people. So this is one of the examples. Protestant missionaries had a different approach. They prepared Africans, but they were very much selective. So they did not be able to prepare many people. They prepared very few people who, in their majority, could not last long, and they did not pass their to the present generation their experiences, even if we can read some of their writings. And the third thing that was not correct in that moment, as we see it, is that they did not prepare African leadership scholars, especially those who could have a strong knowledge of theology. So our theology is very weak and is not able to challenge many of the issues that happen in our nation, in our country, because there is no competence to do this. And to date, those who are still trying to do something, they are not united, as I said. People are fighting, are competing, and this is not the way to feed a good church and to build a strong nation. It's what I can say in this second question.
Yes, then we have Reverend Charles Barahino. Please, can you address the same questions?
Yes, thank you. Talking about this question, I think we first of all need to look at an anthropological way where, for example, we see that during the colonization period, colonizers, divided Africa using tribes. And unfortunately, we see that some tribes, so some ethnic groups have been, split within countries, but also some have even gone beyond borders of countries. And unfortunately, we see that in the past has generated some conflicts. But even today, we see some of the conflicts still erupting even today. I'm in Kenya, and I give an example, for example, of the Maasai group in Kenya. Some of the Maasai groups have been split between Kenya and Tanzania. And over the years, there have been some issues around this in terms of distribution of resources. So in a way, colonization has a fragmentation of communities that has been done by colonizers and even the missionaries is in a way, causing conflicts. I'm giving the example of Maasai's, the Maasai group in Kenya, the Maasai group in Tanzania. The way distribution of resources among the two is causing conflicts. But we also know of this in other contexts in Africa. It is also the same the way the missionaries did when they were dividing geographical areas for missionaries to operate. So we see that in a way, these created a bit of conflicts. Not those days, but today it may be a source of conflict. How has racism actually outlived the colonization and the missionary activities on the continent? Again, basing on the issue of tribalism, as I was explaining, there can be no doubt that race was a key factor in the exploitation of the African continent and the resultant legacy of colonization and the slave trade as we know it. Every tribal identity did not escape the colonial experiment, with colonization concretizing perceived tribal differences and creating hierarchy as a mean of divide, or as a mean to divide the indigenous people. So we have seen that in the past, when colonizers were dividing people, saying this tribe is superior to this one, and hence these caused the conflicts. Which conflicts we are even seeing it today? I can give a clear example of me being from Burundi, the Hutu-Tutsi issue in Burundi and Rwanda, where, for example, in Burundi, colonizers said Tutsis are a superior tribe to Hutus, and they made the contrary in Rwanda, where they said Hutus are superior tribe to Tutsis, just to divide, the people within one country. So we can see, of course, it's that kind of tribalism, that kind of fragmentation that colonization has done within countries. You know how it has affected the lives of the people in the different countries, how it has, been a source of conflicts in the different countries. Of course, I'm glad we can say today that people are trying to overcome that, but this has been a source of conflict, and this has been brought in by colonization. Let me limit myself on that. Thank you.
We now come to Prof. Israel Chitando. Can you respond to those two questions?
Thank you very much, moderator. My colleagues have already covered most of the issues, but I will again draw attention to perhaps two key ones. What does an oppressor have as an advantage over the oppressed? It is the mind of the oppressed. One of the most veritable resources that an oppressor has is the capacity to capture the mind of the oppressed and make the oppressed feel inferior. And therefore, what colonialism has done and racism is to engender in us, particularly as Black Africans, a deeply felt inferiority complex. And therefore, when the question says to what extent has colonialism and racism persisted in the post-colonial period, I dare say to us, sisters and brothers on this call, it has persisted primarily and principally through the colonized mind of the Black African. That is number one. Number two, it has persisted in the fragmentation of the African psyche. What we witness in Africa today is an Africa that is terribly divided in terms of the agenda. We have come up with the Africa we want. The African Union has been very creative in putting forward the African agenda. But how are we going to achieve this agenda if on the 25th of May, 2022, we are not even aware of Africa Day? How can we mobilize the young people of this continent to be passionate about Africa when our political leaders particularly do not demonstrate love for this continent? If the first thing they do is to plunder and loot resources of this continent and export them to Europe and North America, then colonialism and racism persist in the minds of the oppressed. Let me conclude by saying it is probably for our generation to invest and invest heavily in our love for the motherland and for Africans in the diaspora. We must again put our minds together to say, how can we as Africans come together to build the Africa we want, characterized by love for the continent, love for the continent's people, and overcome racism. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much. We now come to the last person to address this, which is Dr. Amoloye Adebayo.
Thank you very much. The two questions actually asked for so much, and I hope I can be as disciplined as the previous speaker. So if you find I'm speaking too much, please feel free to stop me at any time. Now, if I start with the first, and I would say that the colonial and missionary fragmentation of communities contribute significantly to present conflict because, and I'm sorry I keep using the Nigerian context, not because it's not true in every other context, but because there are just so many examples and there's so little time. So it's convenient for me to simply refer to Nigeria. In the Nigerian context, what it has bequeathed to people is that it's very, very convenient to pretty instrumentalize anything to oppress other people, notably law, religion and education. Now, the law was instrumentalized. Some religious laws were recognized, not because the colonialists really cared for the faith of the people that were colonized, but because it was easy to keep people compliant once they had their faith. And they were prepared to recognize that and even export those religious laws into constitution of independent or would-be independent nations thereafter. And the citizens continue to grapple with the aftermath of this. Now, education, the church was also instrumentalized. Now, because, and I would say that Christianity was the main, vehicle for education in the English curriculum. And I like to say education in English curriculum rather than use the term Western education, because there's a way that allows some people to appropriate that kind of education as though it's a form of privilege for any other person to be educated that way. And I would say that there are other forms of education on the African continent before education in the English curriculum. And the church was instrumentalized for that, because then you had to forego all other forms of identity to be educated in this way. And that continues till present, that there's then that fear of that form of education, and that actually fed and allowed to grow a terrorist group in Nigeria called Boko Haram. Boko means book to depict Western education, and it is haram. Haram, the word illegal, because you would have to be divested of your Islamic identity to be educated in the Western so-called way. The same way for religion. There's really not much time to go into this. Now, we find that these are legacies of the colonial activity, but continue to feed present ways that citizens would define themselves in relation to themselves in terms of being self-aware, and would also allow that to also, sort of define how they relate with others. The so-called defining the external others, seeing others as people that are out to dominate, or feeling insecure when people that are different from you in terms of religion, law, or tribe or language come, rather than having a sense of oneness. We're on the same continent. Now, I will leave that at that, to then move to how has racism outlived colonization and missionary activities on the continent. And I would say that what Africans seem to continue to do is to define racism anew. And I give 3 examples. Unwillingness to let go of stereotypical attitude is a form of racism, particularly when there is no legitimate basis for it. Of course, perhaps there are people that have been dominated, that have been treated a particular way. There is no reason to continue to weaponize history or to continue to play victim when descendants of the same people aren't treating you the same way that their ascendants had. But in the face of, that, to continue to play victim, and I say that perhaps like in the terms of like Muslim-Christian relation, okay, or perhaps the educated elite and the non-educated, unwillingness to let go of stereotypical assumptions in Nigeria lead to lots of armed conflict. The fear of the North, okay, so-called political North, or so-called political South, okay, dominating politically the North, and unwillingness to come to table and discuss, because we then feel we can never really be the same. We can't have mutual aspirations. We can't have common claims because we'd always have this division. If one is that unwilling, and I would say you're putting a new face to racism on the African continent, we have to be open. It's not that we shouldn't be students of history, but we should not weaponize that history. We should give each and every brother or sister an opportunity to demonstrate what they would stand for before we are judgmental. And that links to unwillingness, again, to show pride in the African identity. And I'm sure you're preaching on the African continent. The Nigerian passport is a passport that people do not really want. And people would prefer to get other forms of identity because of what it means to be African. And being a proud African does not mean you run away from your problems. It means you embrace them and look to the continent for solutions to African problems. You may learn from elsewhere, but you are proud that every other context would have had their problems before they became what they are. So if one lacks pride in the African identity, I would say is a new form of racism, because that signifies that we consider any other form of identity that we would like to be superior. It's better to embrace the African identity with its problems, okay? That would sort of engender a sincere search for solution. And I would say unwillingness to accommodate legitimate fears of others. I remember a time when Boko Haram was sort of employing or using young girls wearing the hijab to blow people up. I was trying to give a lift to an old woman who was carrying heavy things in the sun. And she looked at me. As a Muslim, I had the responsibility to demonstrate that, yes, there are people that are dressed like me that you would feel insecure about, but I really just want to help. So unwillingness to also recognize that people would have legitimate fear if you are an ascendant of peoples that have sort of discriminate against people or sort of have oppressed people or have been responsible for something. You have to be willing to also grant that kind of accommodation to others. Of course, where there's no legitimate basis to feel insecure yourself, you shouldn't continue to foster that. And I think I'll stop there. I see that Prof. Eric came on. So
yes, thank you very much, Amoluyi Adebayo. Thank you very much for your comments. Now we move on to the next round of questions. And here the question is more, we are now coming home to really finding solutions to what we are doing. The fourth question says, how can the WCC and member churches be involved in conflict resolution activities to reclaim the significance of the 25th of May? We start from Prof. Chitando. Prof. Chitando, you are the first to address this.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the turn towards finding solutions, because we run the danger of being in perpetual mourning. I do recognize that the question centers on WCC member churches, but I would like to broaden it to say then, how do the citizens of the African continent come together to mobilize, recognize, and appreciate the importance of 25th of May as Africa Day? As far as I'm concerned, the process that we need to undertake and engage in is the process of, number one, memorialization of the 25th of May, particularly by setting it aside as a continentally recognized day of remembrance and forward planning. And so I would expect the member churches and religious communities of Africa to invest, beginning from primary school, in our homes, in our families, in our communities, and even in our regional groupings, SADC, ECOWAS, East African Community, come together very deliberately and say, if the 25th of May means so much to us as a continent, how is it possible that perhaps only 11, if not less, African countries consciously, deliberately, and purposefully set aside this as a public holiday? I know that, of course, a critic will say it is not enough to simply make it a public holiday. But I'm saying that in our curricula, in our engagements as churches and faith communities even, and I want to salute our sister from the Muslim faith here on this call, to say that when it comes to mobilizing for Africa, we should transcend our ethnic, local and national divisions and work together collectively for the Africa we want. And so in summary, I would say for us to cover ground on ensuring that we say never again to racism, never again to the marginalization, and what the Cameroonian anthropologist and theologian Father Angel Beck then called the anthropological pauperization of Africans. I submit to us that in order for us to salute the humanity of Africans, let us make the 25th of May of every year a day of remembrance and forward planning. I thank you and over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Ezra. We now move on to Charles Berahino. Please, can you address us on this, the fourth question?
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I think as Prof. Ezra has said, the first thing is to call on WCC and its member churches to memorialize the day, because so few really remember that this is the day that Africa has to commemorate. So that is the first thing. And the second thing to me, I think WCC and its member churches will need to promote African patriotism, especially among the younger people. For me, that is, and there are so many ways to do this. I will not go into details, but for me, promoting African patriotism, especially among the younger people, is key. The third thing, I think WCC and its member churches, we need to rethink, or we need to reinvigorate the mission itself of the church. We are talking about post-colonial period, we are talking about independence, but how is Africa independent? So I'm calling on WCC and its member churches to relook at the mission itself of the church. We are not only there for evangelization, but for the holistic ministry of the church. And lastly, may I call to WCC and its member churches to exercise its pastoral ministry of presence in the different countries. It is not quite different from the previous one, but WCC and its member churches have to advocate for peace, have to advocate for an African, an independent continent. So this means a lot, but there is a need of, ministry of presence, so that the prophetic role of the church, we are talking about WCC and its member churches. So there is a need of raising and promoting the prophetic role of the church to fight for independence of Africa in its meaning. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We move to Naomi Chiranda. Please, can you address us? Dr. Naomi Chiranda.
Yes. I think that my predecessor said a lot, and I will just stamp in what he said, because if as a church in a country we are not united, and for example, Mozambique has only 2 member churches that are working with WCC. Other churches can be there because they are colonial church is member, but they don't understand what is been doing, why is which is the necessity for them to be members. So there are issues that people are not understanding. and they don't know what is being done by WCC. So it will be very important to bring all churches and to understand the history they don't know, and to find ways to show our political leaders that our fight for independence will never be reached if the church, which is the majority, does not understand the issues that it has to do.
Thank you very much. We now come to our last speaker on this, Dr. Amoloye Adebayo.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I will just add my voice to what has been said by the previous speaker. And I think, for instance, this webinar is one of the steps in the right direction. And I do hope this kind of conversation could be, organized at a much more larger level and some other platforms. Because I think what we need to continue to do is to have this kind of mediated dialogue, mediated in the sense that we continue to have dialogue for the correct values and for the appropriate reasons, and not merely for disguised motives, merely window dressed with certain things. So I would say that the WCC is already taking the step in the right direction. And I would also then add that perhaps what should again come out more in the fore is to sort of deconstruct the minds of people against instrumentalization of religion for political purposes or for sectarian domination, as well as window dressing some motives with religion. I think I see in the point that that's part of what the WCC has at its mandate. And I would say that they're already taking the step in the right direction. And I just hope that the platform will be expanded more. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we thank you so much for your comments. Now we move into the next session. Gunda, can you give us some direction on the questions and answers?
Yes, we have questions that are in the chat, Prof. So the first question that we have in the chat has come from someone. May someone explain the difference between the work that has been done by Western missionaries, anthropologists, archaeologists, that has affected the African liberation? And the second question is, the scramble and partition of Africa never considered the tribal ethnic. Could this also set a springboard for continued conflicts in Africa? And there's another question that has been put to Dr. Amoloye Adebayo. What is your response to the Deborah murder in Sokoto? So those are the three questions. We now have a fourth one. To what extent can WCC assist in the reconciliation of broken relations of divided churches, especially if there are deep divides in substantive matters? So we can have these questions, Prof, and our panelists can help us respond. And to participants that are online, please, you can also put your own questions into the chat, and we'll try and have the panelists respond to them.
Right. Thank you very much, Gunda. Now, panelists, you can pick any of the questions and address them. But we have a specific one that is addressed to Dr. Amoloye. She can respond to that and others can pitch in. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think my response to the mother of Deborah will be pretty much the response of any other sane and logical human being. A life has been lost, and in a gruesome way. So what other response would one have except to say that that is something that is inhuman, degrading, and should never have occurred. But let me also then signpost that that is not the first time that that is happening in Nigeria. In fact, people have been lynched that are adherents of the Islamic faith. As I speak, there's an authoritative decision of the Nigerian Supreme Court called Shala versus State. And in that case, it was in fact a Muslim that was lynched. So it's not the first time that someone is going to be lynched for blasphemy against the Prophet of Islam, on him be peace. But in this instance, is a non-Muslim, a Christian. So the question of how to treat blasphemy or the appropriate space to give it under the Nigerian law is an ongoing one. And in that sense, that would ask for a response in a situation where a murder has occurred, an offense, to begin to ask for a response from ordinary individuals when there is a Supreme Court decision that say that that is murder. And even in that decision, not that there is no consideration for the fact that adherents of the Islamic faith would consider themselves bound by the Islamic law, and that blasphemy is an offense under Islamic criminal law. It is a political offense. But for an offense, the appropriate channel for that, the trial of an offense, which goes through the evidentiary rule, is the court. Now, the problem, as we've signposted, is also tied to what we have been discussing. Now, in northern Nigeria, people appropriate to themselves the right to defend religion in whatever guise. And if you read a lot of the write-ups that have been coming on, you would find then that a lot is tied to the fact that there is no appropriate definition of what religion represents and how people should go about it. And in spite of an existing Supreme Court decision, and the Supreme Court decision founded those people guilty of murder. And the specific word of the justices is that those people killed a fellow adherent of the same faith and described the gruesome details. After that, there are trials in court. Someone was almost lynched again about 2 years ago. And that person was again a Muslim. To my own memory, this is the first time that a non-Muslim is being lynched for the offense of blasphemy. Naturally, I am sure that the perpetrators will be apprehended and they will be brought before the court and they will be found culpable and they will be punished. But does that return the life of the innocent young girl, Deborah? And that again signposts how we need to continue to engage ourselves on the appropriate ways to treat religion. Because at the end of the day, the problematic thing is that the perpetrators were also prepared for death anyway. If you would read the text of their testimonies before the court in these cases that I've mentioned, you would find that there is the expectation of a spiritual reward for defending a central figure in the creed. So regardless of what the law does or not, is an ideological ideological thing. It's an attitudinal thing. It's something that we need to engage. Remember, regardless of whether how we protect people through human rights, through the law, at the end of the day, it is the potential victim with the perpetrators. And at those points, the state is too far away, isn't it? The law is too far away. And all we have are these gruesome details, and we begin to debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, response to the other questions that Gunda read.
Okay, from me?
Yes, you can continue if you want to pick.
Now, to what extent can WCC assist in reconciliation of broken relations of divided churches? Yes, I would. As far as I'm concerned, I think that to begin with, I'm a Muslim and I strongly believe in my faith. But I also appreciate that it is according to an order that is higher than all of us, that we are all different. And rather than running away from these differences, there are commonalities that we should focus on. And I think in dialogues such as this, what alienates people is to start from those areas of differences. And I will say that the WCC has taken the right direction in things like this. I'm a Muslim, okay, and I think I'm the only Muslim here, I don't know, but I've been invited to speak here, and I didn't feel in any way constrained that I couldn't be sincere with my thoughts and my perspective. And I think that is the correct way to go about, that we focus on the commonalities, and we find that we are exhausted from the discussions of these commonalities that we even forget the differences. Because, and the differences, we will not shy away from them because they are what makes up our identity. But I think we're always more interested in the common humanity that ties all of us together. And if we begin discussion from that, and I think the WCC can do more, yes, by bringing such kinds of discussion. I particularly like the framing of the theme and the topic for this conversation. It's a way that, it's sort of like, if you talk about missionary legacies that fragmented communities, I mean, we're talking about missionary activities that are connected to a faith that the WCC isn't, it's affiliated to. So a commitment to that openness, to that candidness, it's able to sort of bring other perspective in the same spirit of openness. And the more we discuss these things, the more we find that strongly held perspectives that are anti-unity are able to be educated, because then we find that there is a common humanity that ties us all. And I think I've responded to two. I'd like to give other speakers opportunity. If there's more time, I can also return to give my perspective on other questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Naomi Chiranda.
Prof, maybe before we go to another panelist, there is a participant who would want to ask a question.
Right.
So, yeah, and his name is Patrick Adebayo. Patrick, you will get the permission to turn on your mic and you can speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm happy to be here. I'm speaking from Nigeria. I was actually typing my question when I just read that I have to put my question on the question and answer box. But I'm glad that I'm given this platform or this privilege to speak. And I have a couple of comments and questions. And the first one is, I have an impression that what, our narratives, centers only about the Western colonization that has happened on African soil. That's the impression I'm having. Maybe because the host of this is a WCC. Maybe that's why we are putting it on that. but researches have shown that the Arabs enslaved more Africans than the West. And on the question of identity, African identity, which I think is important to our conversation here, I was actually, because I heard Dr. Adebayo, who happens to, we bear the same name here. I heard Dr. Adebayo talking about we should not, when we are having conversation like this, we should not walk on eggshell. We should try to, while we're respectful to each other, we should try as much as possible also to be truthful, so that it doesn't become a window dress conversation. I'm actually thinking of, she also to mention decolonization. I'm thinking about when will African Muslims have, decolonized Islam to bring about African identity in Islamic theology? I'm looking forward to that, because I see that a lot of Christians are having that decolonization now. And I read a couple of works about, a lot of people, works in Islam, particularly from the liberation theology perspective. So I'm looking at the situation where African Muslim will first of all look at their identity as African before being Muslims. So it's just an imagination from my point here, and I'm hanging that on that. And the second point I want to raise is that I heard Dr. Adebayo also to talk about the missionaries factoring some Christian notions or identity into the constitution of independent African nations. Using Nigeria as a context, I've argued, in so many fora that Nigeria is not a secular state, although it is written that it's in a constitution that it's a secular state. But the same secular state has provisions of Sharia in our 99 constitution. So we'll begin to, because she cited, Nigeria experiences, and that is why I'm actually putting also to Nigeria experiences and examples to her, that some of these things are part of the convolution that we are having as Africans. And that is why I thought about, when will African Muslims have their own identity as Africans and decolonize a lot of Arabian culture in Islam? I'll end here so that others can have access to conversation going on. I really thank you for this platform of giving me a voice to speak here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Can I just come in and clarify something? I think I do appreciate Patrick's input, but when we were planning this event, we wanted to spotlight colonialism and Christianity. So I don't think it would be fair to ask Dr. Amoloye Adebayo to respond, because it's good that Patrick raises questions that can be taken up, but this is not the platform for Dr. Adebayo to be on the spotlight on that. We brought her in for being an African woman that's passionate about Africa, and that is competent to be part of this panel, but not to spotlight Islam. So I would rather Dr. Adebayo does not respond, but we have that in other platforms where we will have conversations with Muslim colleagues. I can raise that question as well with them, but I think this platform is really spotlighting Christianity and colonialism. It would be unfair to spotlight Islam. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I agree with you perfectly. I think we want a more broader discussion. And I think so we'll broaden it to see how we spend the African Day in such a way that the issue of colonialism and the fragmentation that it brought, and then the way it has actually conditioned us as those of faith, and how we want to wiggle ourselves out of it when we celebrate our African Day. I think that's the central point that we want to do. So now let's move to the other panelists to respond to the questions that are in the box. So I want Naomi Chiranda to add her voice to what Dr. Amole has said. It seems you are muted. You are muted.
I'm muted down. The issue was concerning Western missionaries, anthropologists, archaeologists. Is that a question?
Yes,
Or
that's one of the questions.
Mm.
So I can read them again for you. May someone explain the difference between the work that has been done by Western missionaries, anthropologists, archaeologists, that has affected African liberation? The second one is the scramble and partition of Africa never considered the tribal ethnic. Could this also set a springboard for continued conflicts in Africa? And the other one is, to what extent can WCC assist in the reconciliation of broken relations of divided churches, especially if there are deep divides in substantive matters?
I will speak about the last one.
Yes.
Because it's what we are experiencing in Mozambique. But I can say that the divide is not because people want to divide, but because people do not know the value of unity. In a moment that there are many churches who brought like Muslims in our country, and people are very are not well trained to be the leaders of the churches, and are poor, and they see that it's better to do what other people are doing in order to have their wealth also, because they needed to feed their families. So it would be very important if we can be brought together to reflect of Protestant identity. It's very important to understand why, for example, as Christian Council member churches work together, and all the issues that benefited the country that now are being lost. So it's important. If we do this, we have tried to do this ourselves, but we feel that it could be very better to be an outsider, to put us questions, because people will reflect more, we understand better, and they be willing to go beyond this. I say this because We work together also as peacemakers. But in our groups, only one or two can express something. Others don't know what to say. So this is the problem that we have in Mozambique. We also work with the other religions, Muslims, Baha'is, Hindus. They are all in the same group, but we don't touch issues that really challenge our peace. We only speak about peace, but we don't touch issues that challenge our peace. So it's necessary an outsider to come and to begin this talk and to go beyond. So we will be able to see that the church will progress.
Thank you very much. We now ask Israel Chitando, Prof, to address any of the questions that he thinks he wants to take. Israel.
Thank you very much, moderator. Sisters and brothers, when Black African students in the Ukraine were fleeing the war, and they've been fleeing the war, and are seeking refuge in Western countries, when they are denied entry, it does not matter whether they are Rastafari, Baha'i, Buddhist, Rasta, Christian or Muslim. They are rejected entry primarily and principally on the basis of the color of their skin. And until we wake up as Africans, Black Africans, to that fundamental reality, that we need to appreciate our identity and the unity of Africa, who will continue to be the last born of this earth, the scum of the earth. And so some of these differences that we want to emphasize based on the basis, based on religion, ethnicity, and so on, are actually the problem of measuring in minors. The major thing is for us as Black Africans to come together as Africa Union recommends in the Africa We Want, and is mandated by Africa Day, to come together as a people belonging to a continent which has a sad history of marginalization, exclusion, and oppression. And so the question I want to address is the one relating to the Western missionaries, anthropologists, and archaeologists. I would say that the record is mixed. On the one hand, missionaries and anthropologists and others came across as, so the tradition is mixed. On the one hand, there was oppression and an emphasis on getting people to heaven. But on the other hand, some of the missionary teachings were actually quite liberating. So the point I then put to us is to say, let us appreciate the mixed heritage that we have in terms of the missionary encounter with Africa. But what I want to emphasize is the commonness that we have as Black Africans. One continent, one people, one love, one identity. Thank you, and over.
Yes. Thank you very much. We now go to Charles Berehino. Please, can you address the questions that takes your fancy?
Yes. May I add to what Prof. Ezra just said? I think when Western missionaries came, they did not only evangelize Africa, but we know that they also brought in some good programs. We know that they started health facilities in Africa. We know that they are the ones in many cases that started schools. So that starting of schools also brought light to some of the Africans, which actually brought them also to fight for independences. So as Prof. Ezra was saying, I think the coming of Western missionaries, in a way, contributed to the liberation of Africa, because they brought a bit of light to some of the African leaders who know that fought for independence. I thank you.
Thank you very much, my panelists, for responding. Gunda, any more questions? Or
May I say something, please?
Yeah.
Well, I say this because I thought when Masiwa said I shouldn't respond to Dr. Patrick.
Yeah.
I thought that what you meant was that it was outside the scope of engagement.
Sure.
I'm a scholar of Islamic law. I'm always prepared to speak about Islam. Okay.
Okay,
so
please, you can say something briefly and then we can, because I was going to take this question up with a colleague who is in interfaith.
No. And I think the first thing I would say is that in terms of instrumentalization of religion, I think the point is not to sort of criminalize any form of religious faith for all the evils or problems that we may currently have in Africa, but that we do not shy away from honest and sincere discussion. In the first instance, my reference to, at no point did I say that the missionaries or the colonizing authority instrumentalized religion to sort of make Nigerian law Christian. In fact, I deliberately did not mention the clear reference to religion in the Nigerian constitution. I meant Islamic law. And you would remember I kept giving the example of Northern Nigeria, which was a system, a part of Nigeria, a part of the country that had a full-fledged application of Islamic law, and that got imported. Remember, I used that to the Nigerian constitution. And whenever I said that, the presence of a particular law in the constitution that adherents would think is in the fulfillment of their religious right actually meant Muslim. But the aspect of our law that we have that is clearly Christian and the clear bias for Christianity would have in criminal law, in the laws of evidence, laws of marriage, and in fact, the common law itself. Again, Muslims and Christians aren't the only religious adherents in Nigeria. There are followers of African traditional beliefs and some other forms of religion that feel discriminated upon by the clear bias for Christianity and Islam in Nigerian laws. And that is what I meant. At no point did I say, when I now talked about instrumentalization, I specifically mentioned missionary activities and their connectedness to education in the English curriculum. Now, for whatever Arabs may have done, then I don't also think that we need to think that our religious identity are contrary to our African or national identity. Because at a point, the word decolonization of religion is again problematic. Because if you say that Islam on the African continent is Arab, it has because of slavery, or because I don't think slavery equates colonization. And again, slavery, Arabs weren't the only ones that were guilty of slavery. At a point in the human civilization, it was even considered an economic vocation. It's not only Arabs. So Americans everywhere, you know, how did Blacks got to America, for instance? But the point I'm making is that to say that Muslims need to divest themselves of their religious or to put the African identity first, I would say, is it only Muslim? The brand of Christianity that we have on the African continent, is it, again, a colonized religion? I would say that the creeds are quite clear and the books are clear as to what or who a Christian is or who a Muslim is. So an Arab culture in Nigeria, it's problematic. I do not understand. But again, I would say as religious identity actually reinforce your national identity in the sense that it propels you, in my view, if religion is interpreted as the ultimate appeal. And because again, what it does is to bring focus away from the individual to a sense of service, to a larger order, because you can only do so much, but we do so well together. And I would say religion is an important basis to articulate such values. But again, no matter how good religion is, whether Islam or Christianity, we must always remember that religious ideals are values. And I think people will generally believe that if it's from a other outside self, it should be good. But to the extent that the religious ideals will be enacted by individuals, so you have bad enactments and good enactments. Remember, I said the church was also instrumentalized, because I said the doctrine of Christianity is also clear. You need not divest yourself of whatever national identity that you would have to be able to access education. But there are also bad enactments within Islam, as you would have bad enactments within Christianity. But the religion would be clear as to what it contains. And to any student of religion, the appropriate thing to do will not be to look at Christians, will not be to look at Muslims, but to study Islam and to study Christianity, to be able to understand that. I think that's how far I can go now, not to keep myself within the specific focus of this conversation. And I thank Patrick. I'm going to share my email. It's a continuing conversation. I think we should be able to have this kind of conversation where we are able to have dialogue, okay, without feeling as if we're spotlighting anyone unnecessarily. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adebayo. It's good to sort of have this kind of conversation. I remember one thing you said, which is that there should be more openness. There should be more openness. We should be transparent. And I think this conversation is part of the process of being more transparent and open with one another. Thank you very much. Now, Gunda,
just your closing remarks, a few minutes, and then we are done, Prof. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you all for the participation. It's been so insightful. But then I just want to draw attention to a few things, and then to call for WCC to look at operationalization, some of these things, especially. First, I think what Prof. Chintando said is very important. When he started, he said that we should not focus so much on only the negatives, but we should look at the positive side of it, that supposing there was no African Day, will it be better than when there is one? And I would say that it is better to have one, because really, there had been a lot of struggles before we had become independent as Africans. So just to feel independent, to feel free, even if we mess it up, at least we have our freedom. I mean, if you look at what is happening today in Ukraine and the fear that Taiwan has, the problems in Hong Kong. I mean, when you look at these things, where there was no clear freedom, there's no clear independence, I think we have to really be happy and say that, it's good we are free now, because if we are not being free, British people will say, hey, no, we are coming to invade you because you want to be free. So I think we need to really appreciate this freedom where we can do things for ourselves. Even if we mess it up, Mali can say, it's none of your problem if we do a coup d'etat. I mean, we are a nation of our own. Of course, we can go to advise them, but we cannot invade Mali for trying to have a coup d'etat. So I think we need to appreciate it. The starting point is and celebrate it. I think the next thing was celebrating, making it a memory, a memorizing thing, and also looking at how we can use it as a way to plan the future. We memorize it and we use it as a way to plan the future. And to plan the future, I would mention the things that have been highlighted so as to plan the future. We heard of the problems about political transition, the conflicts that comes from political transition. We need to look at that and look at how we can address the transition that we've had, and the challenges, the difficulties, the conflicts that generated, and that would be important. The next is the issue of religious conflicts and tribal conflicts. I like this statement that says that the religious conflicts, the tribal or ethnic conflicts, we have to look at the fact that there's what we call poverty of imagination, which has resulted in economic conflicts. And the poverty of imagination comes from these ethnic and religious conflicts, which has disinformation, misinformation in it, which sort of fits into some of the economic and the political conflicts that we have. And also, we also saw this idea of generational conflict. And this generational conflict comes from as we move from one generation to the other. There's a generation that knew certain things, another generation has come, and in all the generations, the religious, economic, and ethnic issues that come up. In our time of charismatism and Pentecostalism, there's so much in terms of generational conflicts between even the traditional churches and the newer churches. There is also issues related to our traditional and cultural setups, which has created all kinds of things around us. And we are trying to look at in the issue of a situation where we are decolonized, how do we use our strengths and build our strength up? The issue of building our strength up so that we take pride in our Africanness. We rethink the issue of our mission as African Christians, African Muslims, and rethinking it in such a way that we take our prophetic role. And this is where I believe that WCC has a role to play in mobilization, in sensitization, capacity building, so as to help Africa forward. So I hope that the next celebration of African Day will be better than this, taking all these things into consideration and having recommendations that are operationable. Thank you very much. I hand over to my boss, Gunda.
Thank you so much, Prof. It feels good to be your boss, actually. But I am so grateful for the day that we have had. I have never felt so proud to be an African than I felt today. I know we have issues, but I'm happy that we all realize we are first and foremost Africans. And I'm so glad and gladdened that we have so many people of African descent that feel they are Africans that have joined us from Brazil, from North America, from the Far East. We have had so many people that have joined us because being African is not only a preserve of those that are on the continent. We all belong. And I hope that we continue this tradition and we continue to come together to find each other and to be more and more proud Africans and to see ourselves moving forward. I thank you so much for your time. I thank you for your presence. I thank you, all the online participants, for your engagement. I've seen questions coming and comments. And to our panelists, no amount of words can ever fully express our gratitude for your generosity in giving us your time today. And for the moderator, thank you so much, Eric. I always can count on you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I wish you all a good evening, a good day, a good morning if you're still early in the day. So all of you, I thank you all for your time. Thank you.